So the big thing that I've learned using ChatGPT is that the quality of the input that you give it affects the quality of the output. Now, this relationship is really stark, and it's been very obvious to me that when I ask it to do something following certain rules, which I'm going to share with you in a moment, I get far better results. Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode where we're talking about prompting ChatGPT. Now, in last week's episode, I did a deep dive into the explosion of interest in generative AI and ChatGPT in particular that we've had since the beginning of 2023. And I talked about some of the ethical concerns and the limitations to the technology, as well as some really massive opportunities for schools. And I'm really excited about AI, but I do want to make sure that we're blending our excitement with some serious consideration around the limitations and the concerns around this new technology. What I'm going to be doing in this week's episode is a bit more of a masterclass in the detailed advice around using ChatGPT, around prompting it. Now, when we say prompting, we mean the text prompts that you enter into the website to tell ChatGPT what you want it to create. So if you're new to all of this, I recommend you go back to last week's episode to have a little listen to that first. If you're ready to get into the details, then stick around with this week's episode, and we're going to dive into 5 different strategies that you can use to really up-level the way that you're using ChatGPT. Just before we get into that, I also want to point you in the direction of the AI in Schools survey, which I've published. I invite you to go to the website, which is www.consultjuliette.co.uk/AI, and that will take you to a short survey where I'm trying to capture attitudes to AI within the school sector, and most importantly, what topics you want to hear about it in the future. As I've said before, I am really excited about this. I probably could do pretty much all the episodes for the rest of this year on AI if you want me to. I don't think you want me to do that, but I want to be able to focus in on the AI topics that you are interested in learning more about, to make sure that my enthusiasm for this subject doesn't get a little bit run away with me, and so that I make sure I'm serving you, the people that I'm really helping to help. So please do go and fill in that survey. I just want to pause for a moment to say thank you to you. The Independent School Podcast has now passed its 2nd birthday, published more than 100 episodes and has had over 6,000 listens. As the founder and host of this podcast, I've been really humbled by the number of people who have told me that it's really helped them. From school heads who've rushed up to me at conferences and told me how it's been a real guide for them through tricky times, through to experienced directors of development who have said it reassures them that they're on the right track. So thank you for listening and for all your kind comments along the way. If this podcast is helping you, then I invite you to join the 300 people who have asked to get my weekly emails. That way you'll hear about each episode as it's published, as well as the special offers that I only tell people about when they're on my mailing list. So to get my weekly emails, you can go to www.consultjuliette.co.uk/sign up. Okay, so we are looking at a period of time where we are having to learn how to use ChatGPT and more widely generative AI in a way that enables us to harness it for productivity and creativity at work. This is new for all of us. This is something that even the AI experts have been surprised by the speed with which this technology has improved over the last year or two. Now, what we want for our pupils eventually is to train them, to help them to understand how to be AI native. And the children that are now in prep schools, our primary schools, as they grow up, excitingly, they are going to become AI native, because all of this will be part of what they do. They will understand how to utilize AI within their lives. As slightly more mature people within our career, we need to learn this ourselves now, proactively, constructively, because we need to be accelerating the speed with which we can use this technology effectively. Not just to become more creative, more productive within our jobs, but also so that we are really producing the best quality work that we can at the fastest pace that we can, so that we're making the biggest difference in the world. So the big thing that I've learned using ChatGPT is that the quality of the input that you prompt, that you give it, affects the quality of the output. Now, this relationship is really stark, and it's been very obvious to me that when I ask it to do something following certain rules, which I'm going to share with you in a moment, I get far better results than if I just give it some vague instruction and expect it to read my mind. It is not a mind reader. You need to tell it what you want. So what I'm going to do in this episode is run you through 5 strategies that you can use to really become an expert at prompting ChatGPT. And when we say prompting, we're talking about the instructions, the written text instructions that you type in to the website. Okay, strategy number 1. This is called chained prompting. This is the idea that you want to create a chain of multiple prompts which, in a very clear way, show and tell the AI what you want it to do. Breaking up the complex task that you want it to complete into several intermediate steps. And we want to do this as if we're doing it to a roughly 14-year-old person. We want to be using short sentences. We want to be using clear language without any excessive use of jargon, with super clear instructions. And we want to do it over a series of steps using a chain of prompts. This is the way, this is the biggest tip that I've learned. This makes a massive difference to how effective GPT is in giving you the results you want. So first of all, what you want to be able to do is give it a little bit of context, not massive, thousands of words of context, but give it some context as to who you are and what you want it to do. And then give it a clear instruction to do one thing. And if it doesn't get it quite right, you want to edit that prompt and then resubmit it. So you don't want to carry on with the conversation by giving it another instruction further down the conversation, down the chat. You want to go back to the prompt that it didn't quite get right, and you want to hover over the little box, which is at least on the desktop version, it's on the right-hand side of the prompt that you gave it, the little pen and box kind of image symbol. If you click on that, then you can edit your prompt and you can click save and resubmit. And you want to do that as many times as you need to help it to understand what you're asking it to do. And only when you've understood what you want it to do correctly do you then want to move to the next step of the instructions that you're giving it in this chain of prompts. So let's use an example, because I'm aware that's not necessarily all that clear. So let's say that you are going to be using ChatGPT to draft an article for the school magazine. Okay? So let's say that you've got the initial idea about what you want it to do. Maybe you've got some text from another format, perhaps from some other place. Maybe there was a short article about it from the head's newsletter and a little press release went out, and you want to combine that text into a longer article in a slightly different format for the school magazine, for example. So the first step might be to work with ChatGPT to get a structure for that article. So the first thing you could do is to ask it, you say, these is the data that I'm inputting, and give it the 2 pieces of text, and to say, could you suggest a structure with subheadings for an article for the magazine which is going to have X words. Now, in my experience, it doesn't always adhere to word limits, interestingly. I think that's because of the way it generates text on the fly. It doesn't always count the words as it goes, but it normally does get it in the right ballpark, even if it's not absolutely accurate. Having then asked it to create headings. And I would recommend, even if you don't want subheadings in your final version, ask it to create the subheadings anyway, because that will give it the structure to work to. So first of all, you ask it to generate the headings. You then go back and re-prompt it until you get the right kind of response. You might then see the headings that it suggested and think, that's roughly right, I'm happy with those headings, but the second heading, I want to change the wording. That's great. Copy and paste what it's suggesting into the input box, make the changes that you want, and then say, thank you, these are the headings that I want to use, and then submit those. The next stage might then be to say that you want it to work on bullet points within each of those headings, those sections of the article that it's identified, or you've helped it identify. And then focus on the bullet points and make sure you've got the bullet points right next. And using a series of prompts or editing those prompts until you get the right set of bullet points. Again, you'll probably want to edit it yourself because it will never be perfect. This is always just a first draft. And then submit the bullet points that you want it to use under the various different headings. Next, ask it to generate the text. Now, if you had gone straight into, here is the heads newsletter and the press release or the short news story on the website, I want you to combine these into a longer article, and just said, write me some text, it could have gone off in any direction it wanted to. And it probably wouldn't have been what you wanted from the article. But because what I've set out here is it's step by step, you did the headings, then you did the bullet points, and then you did the text, you were able to edit at each stage to redirect it where it got it slightly wrong at each stage. So the final version is likely to be much, much closer to what you want written. You will always need to make changes. You may then want to remove those subheadings, for example. You may then need to make changes to make that possible. But you're much more likely to get an article which is more in the direction that you want than had you just given it one instruction, which is use this text input to create a magazine article. So that's what I mean by creating a chain of prompts, multiple prompts over time that get you closer and closer to the result that you want. In actual fact, with that example, it would then be very useful once you've edited the final text, you then say, okay, this is the text that I have decided to use as the final text. You re-enter it into the website and then ask it to generate LinkedIn posts first. I always find LinkedIn is better first because it's longer format. You need to give some instructions on how many words you want, hashtags, etc., but that's the good next stage. And then as a final stage, it's probably better to then do the shorter social media posts. So whether that's tweets or things for Instagram or whatever it might be, keeping those last. So you go from longer to shorter in terms of the different chain of prompts that you're asking it to do. So that's the first strategy, is making sure that you practice giving really clear, short prompts, but knowing that you can get to your final result in a number of intermediate steps. And the second piece of advice in there is to use that little edit box. By clicking on that little box, you can edit your own prompt and get it to regenerate. That is very helpful when you're learning to prompt, to make sure that you're improving your prompts over time. So that's strategy number 1, chained prompting. Strategy number 2, this is about training ChatGPT to know your tone of voice and style. Now, in last week's episode, I talked through a whole variety of ways in which you could use ChatGPT within your school. And a number of those were to do with generating text for emails, internal and external, for writing articles, for social media, for writing reports, potentially even drafting minutes, although, as I said before, sensitivities around inputting sensitive data probably stop us from doing that at the moment. But there are various different tones of voice that you would do all of those in. You're not going to want your newsletter to sound the same as your Twitter feed, for example. Now, we as humans have learned, and this is actually interestingly one of the things that early stage career people, so younger people starting out their career, they take a while to get this tone of voice right for different forms of communication. And so we need to train ChatGPT to do the same thing. And it's actually quite difficult to get that tone of voice and style right. Now, I think that it's probably, with the technology as it is at the moment, it's not realistic to expect it to get it absolutely right. You have to expect to do the final edit yourself if you want it to sound like you or like your organisation. There is probably no way around that, at least at the moment. But there is a technique that I've been using that I've learned which gets you as close as possible to that final version, so that the hand edits that you're doing as a human are relatively small. And that is by training it to know your tone of voice and style. So again, we're going to be using a chain of prompts to achieve this, just like I spoke about in the last strategy. And the first of these prompts is to give it a piece of text that you are happy with. So for the same audience, for the same communications channel that you are generating this new piece of text on, give it an example of something that you're already happy with that you've done in the past. And give it the prompt, analyze the tone of voice and style of the following text. And then insert your text. What it will do is it will analyze the text and it will give you a description of what it thinks your tone of voice and style in that text were. So what you can then do is copy that description that it's given you of your tone of voice of style and write into the next prompt, use the following tone of voice and style for all future responses in this chat, and then paste its description of the tone of voice and style and press enter. Now, this normally works. Sometimes it forgets. It might do it for a couple. In fact, one time I did it, it was very cheeky and it wrote back, "That's fine, but I'm not a mind reader. What do you want me to do?" Which I thought was one of the funniest responses I've had so far from ChatGPT. I really thought that was good. So it can sometimes do this quite well. You can then ask it to draft things, and you've instructed it to always use that tone of voice and style. Sometimes it forgets. So sometimes what you have to do is to then repeat by pasting in that description of the tone of voice and style into future prompts. And obviously if you want it to then shift into a different tone of voice and style, let's say you're shifting from drafting a newsletter article into drafting some tweets, then you might need to either use a different chat within the system, or to then tell it, ignore previous instruction, I now want you to use the following tone of voice and style in all future responses in this chat. So experiment with it. It's not bulletproof, but I found it to be much more effective doing this than just expecting it to be able to read my mind and understand what it is that I want it to be able to do in terms of the tone of voice that it's producing. So do let me know how that goes. I'd love to hear a little bit more. I'm always looking for new little tweaks and changes to the way that I'm doing things as well. So the third strategy I want to tell you about is about setting the temperature for your generative AI. Now, this is something which I've only learnt relatively recently. I have been experimenting with it. It does appear to work. I've read lots of blogs about the fact that it does appear to work, but I still might be a little bit patchy for you. But I think this is really helpful if we can understand this together better. So in generative AI, the temperature is the phrase that ChatGPT uses to describe its decision about how much it should be focusing on accuracy and relevance, and how much it should be focusing on creativity and ideation. Now, what ChatGPT has is a measurement from 0 to 1, so it's a scale from 0 to 1, where the lower the temperature, so down as far as 0 in extreme, means that it's going to be far more accurate and relevant results, but it might be a bit repetitive, or it might be a bit simplistic in its response. And if you tell it that you want the temperature to be 1 at the other extreme, it will be more random, more creative, but it might also end up being a bit nonsensical, a bit irrelevant in its responses. Now, interestingly, when I first read about this on some blogs and so on that I've been reading, I went to ChatGPT and said, tell me more about this temperature thing. And so much of what I've learned about it is actually from ChatGPT itself. And I think this is an important tip, is if you're not sure, ask ChatGPT how you should be using it and what tips and techniques you might want to learn about. So what we can do is we can actually tell it specifically within the text prompt what temperature we want it to be. Now, I know that programmers who are using the API format for using GPT, the language within their own applications, are able to set this specifically in the back end with the API. What seems to be a bit less clear at the moment is to what extent, if I, as a user of ChatGPT, the interactive chatbot kind of element of the language, it's not entirely clear that it always takes direction on its temperature within that setting. So there's a little bit of uncertainty around this because this is a changing field all the time. But I've tested it and it does seem to influence the extent to which the results that you get are towards the 0 end, more accurate, which obviously in some circumstances is what's most important, or towards the 1 end of the temperature spectrum, more creative, which sometimes, if you're using it for ideation, for example, is what's most important. What's also really interesting is that you can do the same thing. So you can just put using temperature of 0 or using temperature of 0.8 in the prompt that you give it, the text prompt you give it. You can also tell it just using words whether accuracy is most important to you or whether creativity is most important to you. And that seems to work as well. So for example, I tested it out by asking it for some ideas for an alumni magazine article. And I asked it specifically to come up with wacky creative ideas with a temperature of 1. And I got more creative ideas where I used the temperature setting and telling it I wanted wacky creative ideas than I did just changing the temperature setting, which is quite useful, quite interesting in itself. And really fascinating. I'm not going to read too much of what ChatGPT told me, but it came up with a couple of really, really cool ideas for alumni magazines. I've often thought that alumni magazines are a bit too straight-laced. They're a little bit too boring, and that most people are engaged by a bit of fun, a bit of humour. So this is an idea for an alumni magazine article entitled Alumni Advice for Surviving the Zombie Apocalypse. And then the subheading, or the first kind of paragraph that it's suggested for this article is, okay, so maybe a zombie apocalypse is unlikely, but it never hurts to be prepared. In this humorous and offbeat article, we ask our alumni for their best survival tips in the event of a zombie outbreak. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure that many schools would use that, but it's definitely a wacky creative idea, which is specifically what I asked it for. The other one I liked it came up with was the Alumni Haunted House, a spooky reunion. Halloween is a time of scares and surprises, and what could be scarier than a haunted house filled with alumni from our school? In this fictional story, we imagine a spooky reunion filled with ghostly apparitions and eerie encounters. Again, I'm not sure quite how many school magazines will put that in, but it's creative, it's wacky. It certainly isn't an idea that I would have come up with on my own. And this is one of the great ways that GPT can help us to be more creative as well as more productive as well. Okay, so I've covered off 3 strategies. I've talked about chained prompting, I've talked about training your chat to know your tone of voice and style, and I've talked about setting the temperature. So let's move on to strategy number 4, and that is that you can tell it the format of the output that you want. Now, sometimes you might want free text, sentences, paragraphs. Sometimes you want something more specific. And ChatGPT often reverts to bullet points, which is great, or numbered lists, which is fantastic. If you want a bullet point list or a numbered list, tell it that that's what you want in your prompt. Make your prompt super clear. Like we said, we're talking to a 14-year-old here. Make it super clear what it is that you're looking for, and then your result is likely to be much more usable. But it can do more than just bullet points or numbered lists. It can also create tables, which can be very helpful. And you can copy and paste that into an Excel spreadsheet. And a phrase like, can you please provide the information in a table format with the following columns, colon, and then you give a list of column names, prompts it to create a table, which is incredibly helpful. As well as tables, it can also create text in Markdown language, which is useful because it actually embeds things like bolds and italics, underlines and so on within free text, which can be really helpful as well. And another tip, ask ChatGPT what format it thinks would be most useful to produce this information in, and experiment and try things over time. I have to say, early on, the first time it produced a table for me by accident, I was blown away. I was like, wow, I'm doing all my research in tables in future. And now I use it a lot for researching things like which conferences to go to, things like that. And producing those tables, that has been a game changer for me, actually. So that's a really good one to be experimenting with and trying. The 5th strategy, which is a little bit less to do with the actual ChatGPT and more to do with our ways of working with it, and that is to document and reuse the prompts that work. So when I realised that I needed to learn more about how to prompt it properly, I started creating a document of the prompts that I'd used that had been successful. And I refined them over time. And there's a little collection of them I'm going to read out to you now, which I find really helpful. But they're not rocket science. Create your own, that's brilliant. But most importantly, record them somewhere as a team so that you can use them repeatedly. Once you've learned what's worked in one situation, it's likely to work again. So obviously, one of the ones that I've documented is analysing the tone of voice and style of the following text. I use that a fair amount. Redraft this text for clarity and flow using a friendly and informed style. That's one I use quite often. I use that when I've got a first draft of a piece of text, which is normally too long, it's a bit repetitive. I've just brain dumped something onto the screen, and then I use that to redraft it, and it's very effective. Summarize this text into 5 sentences or bullet points, and again, you can obviously alter the numbers or whether you want sentences or bullet points. It's a really helpful one. Are there any errors or inconsistencies in this text using British English? I find that one really helpful because it brings up typos and inconsistencies as well. So maybe I've used hyphenation for a particular phrase in one place but not another. It'll pick up on things like that. So there are all sorts of different prompts that you can reuse again and again and again. So keeping them in a document is really helpful. Bit of a pro tip on this one, I also use something called Text Expander, which means that I'm able to type in just a couple of keystrokes and it then can recreate that entire prompt for me, which means that I can work even faster. It's another productivity tool that I found really helpful. So these are 5 areas where if you can learn to prompt ChatGPT more effectively, the output that you're going to get is going to be far, far better than if you just kind of randomly sit there and chat with it. But as a final point, I would say that I found it much more fun when I still say please, I still say thank you to it. I don't quite ask it how its day is going, but I'm using a chatty, informal tone, but where my directions of what I want it to do are super, super clear. That's how I found that I get a bit of fun out of working with it at the same time as giving super clear instructions. So as we wrap up, that's 5 strategies that you can use to improve your prompting within ChatGPT. Number 1 was using a chain of prompts. Number 2 was training it to know your tone of voice and style. Number 3 was playing around with the temperature. Number 4 is telling it the format of the output you're looking for. And number 5 was documenting and reusing those prompts that work. And have some fun at the end of the day as well. This is a fun new technology. We do need to be aware of its limitations, of its ethical concerns, as I talked about last week. But basically, it is an area where we can experiment and have fun and be quite creative as well, which is great. So don't forget to go and fill in that survey about AI in schools, which we linked from the episode notes. I've also put a link in there to last week's episode about ChatGPT for schools. If you missed that, you want to go back and listen to that again, then the link is in the episode notes. I'm also giving you a short list of a whole variety of other resources, some podcasts, some blogs to read around the role of generative AI and the role that it's going to play in our schools in the future. So that's it for now. I look forward to talking to you again next time. Bye then. Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.